Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're having our work session on streets. And could we do a roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Dickey.
Here.
Vice Mayor McMahon. Councilmember Friedel.
Present.
Councilmember Grzybowski.
Present.
Councilmember Toth.
Present.
Councilmember Skillicorn.
Present.
Councilmember Kalavianakis.
Here.
Thank you all so much. I guess, do you want us to kick it off, Justin, for us? That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, council members, first, welcome to this year's last work session. I know everybody's excited about that. There's going to be two presentations tonight. The first one is going to primarily focus on the results of the most recent pavement analysis. The second one is going to concentrate or provide direction and information related to the all-volunteer streets committee that have worked for the last 20 months to support their community. It's important to note that what's going to be discussed tonight is arguably one of the town's most valuable assets, also one of the most expensive to own and maintain, which is our streets. The first presenter tonight is Zach Thomason from Roadway Asset Services. I've had the privilege of working with this young, intelligent young man for the last several years through two different companies. He does what he does incredibly well, and oftentimes, and I'm only bringing this up because you may have to do so as well, have him slow down a little bit. He's so well versed that he rolls and rolls and rolls, and I have challenges keeping up with him. With that, Zach?
Justin, thank you for the introduction. Madam Mayor, Town Council, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I do love pavement management. This is what I do. We take our work seriously. We don't take ourselves seriously. So what we're going to talk about today is the state of the roadway network here in Fountain Hills. So we're going to start with some basic terminology. I know that everybody is not pavement experts, so we're just going to talk about what some of that terminology you're going to hear me say today is. The first thing is centerline miles. We talk about that a lot. Think about centerline miles as if you are walking down the center line of a road, smack in the middle, and you walk for a mile. That is a centerline mile. Irregardless of number of lanes or width of road, you're walking for a centerline mile. The town maintains approximately 166 centerline miles of road here in the town. Now, if we take into account area and all those lanes and the width of road, the town maintains approximately 3.5 million square yards of pavement. That's a lot of pavement. It's enough pavement to pave a small 2-lane road all the way from here to Las Vegas if you so desired. So it's no small feat to maintain and manage this network on a daily basis. When we talk about network replacement value, what would it take to replace this asset on the books if we had to today? If we're just looking at pavements, surface and subgrade, not sidewalks, drainage, or anything else, just pavements, you're nearly a $250 million asset just with the pavements alone. So this is a big deal that we're talking about from a financial perspective. PCI, so Pavement Condition Index, that is simply a 0 to 100 score that ranks the health of a roadway. 0 is absolutely horrible, turning back to gravel. 100 is a perfectly brand new road that was paved this morning. Preservation, we talk about preservation techniques on roads. These are lightweight, cost-effective treatments that we can apply to roads in an effort to extend their design life at the absolute lowest cost. So we'll talk more about that here in the next couple slides too. You're not going to hear me mention it often because it's very technical, but ASTM D6433, these are the rules that we adopted to measure the pavement distresses in the field and calculate the PCI score. It's the closest thing to a national standard that most folks adopt when doing a pavement condition assessment. So with that, let's kind of jump into some basic topics. What's the purpose of pavement management? Let's break it down very, very simply. The purpose of pavement management is to pick the right road at the right time with the right treatment. That's the whole philosophy of pavement management in prioritizing and financially optimizing what gets picked. Now, roads are no different than any other asset we maintain, our houses and our vehicles. We change the oil, flush the coolant in an effort to maximize the life of our vehicles. We consciously do not defer this routine maintenance because we know what's going to cost us later in extensive maintenance on our vehicles. Roads are the same way. So we know if we can capture roads before they kind of fall off that cliff that you see there on that first line, if we can capture them early, we can spend roughly $4 a square yard maintaining roads as opposed to $40 a square yard rebuilding them later. This is the van that drove all of the town streets. My kids call this the Ghostbusters van. It's got a lot of high-tech equipment that's on it. The meat and potatoes is that fin on the back end. That is a laser crack measuring system. It's a very high-resolution camera with laser line illumination. It is responsible for measuring the width and depth of all the cracks and all the distresses that fall beneath it. So it's a very objective and repeatable assessment that we conducted. The big boom that you see on top there, that is a panoramic camera. So we collected full right-of-way imagery in addition to that downward pavement imagery. And the town is going to get access to all of this imagery. It is yours as the town. So we captured all this information. You can see there in the upper left-hand side of that picture there, might be difficult, but we take all of these images from the van and we process it using a piece of software called RoadTrip. And its job is simple. It takes the imagery, it draws in all the cracks, it measures the cracks, it classifies the type of distress that it is, and then it calculates that PCI score for every block or every segment in the town. One of the things that we also do on all of our assignments is we do an on-site field pilot. So an on-site field pilot is where we select a sample of 10 miles of road, and we come on site with the town, and we walk these roads. We've already processed the data, and the purpose is really twofold. It's to ensure that everyone's interpretation of distresses are the same. We're adhering to a set rule, that ASTM that I referenced earlier, but if I ask you what a good road is versus what I think a good road is based on my rules, we could be different in that perception. So the pilot is really to bring that together and to address that perception there. And we conducted that with town staff as well as the streets committee, as you can see there in some of the pictures. We took a sampling of roads, poor roads, good roads, fair roads, arterial roads, local roads, collector roads, a full sampling of roads as a part of that pilot effort. Then, of course, we evaluated any changes to historical data that may have resulted from the evolution of technology or processing of software as well. So with that, let's kind of start digging into some of the data. So every bit of data that we captured is linked to the city's GIS centerline file. So every block, every segment has data tied to it. As you can see here in these imageries, we captured the data in the town and have breadcrumbs across all town-maintained roads. The condition data itself, you can see here in several different formats. The map on the left-hand side of the screen, that is simply a map that is plotting the PCI conditions in color-coded using the same descriptive terms that I believe were adopted by the town back in 2018. So terms like excellent and fair and marginal and whatnot. Map in the middle, just a zoomed in picture there where you can see a number in the middle of each segment. That is the PCI score for each segment. But more importantly, when we look at things from a 30,000 foot view, that table shows you the PCI or the condition distributions for each category. So at the end of the table there, you see the percent of network by centerline miles for that particular table, and it can start giving you a good indication of what the condition or what the data tells us about the town's network. If I put that in graph form with what you're seeing here, this is a typical PCI distribution graph. But now, instead of percentage of centerline miles on the y-axis, we have percent of area. We always want to look at things on a percent by area basis. This can tell us a lot about an agency before we even run an analysis. So a couple of metrics that I use to assess the health of any given agency is the network average PCI score. Your network average at the time of the survey was a 69. So everything averaged together, weighted average 69. Typically, the average we see across the country is between about a 60 to 65. Less than 1 in 10 agencies will score above a 75, just to put that into context. So it's not a bad score. However, just looking at PCI alone can be a little deceiving. There's more to it than just that, and we'll get to that here in a minute as well. Percent of good roads is important. So typically, the average we see is about 15% of an agency's network will fall in the excellent category. That tells us if an agency has an active, ongoing pavement management program and if they've been reinvesting in the network. We can clearly see the town has. Now, the big question is it enough? Is it enough investment to maintain existing conditions in the town? And we'll answer those questions here too. Backlog is the last metric that we address. Backlog is all the big ticket work. It's your expensive full reconstruction and partial reconstruction activities. So basically everything below a 40 there, the poor and very poor roads that you see in the graph, that's backlog. Now, when you take it at face value and you look at the graph, the town's backlog at the time of the survey was 5.44%. It's a wonderful number. Anything less than 10% is considered financially ideal from a pavement management perspective. But one thing I want to caution you on that you'll see in the analysis results too is that the roads in marginal, fair, and good represent roads that are at the steepest part of their pavement deterioration curve and are degrading at their most rapid rate. So they are quickly degrading into backlog. So as you move forward in forecasting, every year something else falls into backlog, even as you fund money to it. So our forecast and modeling are going to review what that backlog looks like over time. Very quickly, typical distresses that we found in Fountain Hills, this is no different than most other agencies we work with in the Southwest. The most common distress we see is weathering and block cracking, which are all environmental distresses. The roads get basically a sunburn. They oxidize over time. They become rigid. That's a very common distress distribution that we see throughout the state, so nothing really major to report there. Something that I do want to point out that'll become evident in the analysis results as well is the distribution by pavement type. So the town has basically two different asphalt roads that we've categorized in the analysis. You've got pre-incorporation asphalt, and then you've got just asphalt roads, which are roads built after incorporation according to town design standards, okay? And the pre-incorporation roads by area only represent 34% of the town's roads. So it's a large portion, but it's not the largest portion. The majority is the asphalt roads. I make that point, which you'll see here in the next couple of slides as to why. Let's look at condition. So here you're seeing another PCI distribution graph. This time I've broken it out by pre-incorporation and post-incorporation. You can see a noticeable difference. So pre-incorporation roads have an average PCI of 56, and the backlog is at 14%. Okay, 14% from a backlog perspective tends to become alarming. That becomes a maximum ceiling point that we recommend as consultants, because as backlog exceeds and approaches, as it exceeds 15% and approaches 20%, it can spiral on you faster than you can pump capital into the pavement management program. You just can't fund it fast enough to keep up. So for the pre-incorporation roads, are at 14% now. The biggest worry, though, is look at those marginal and fair roads. Those are a whole bunch of pre-incorporation roads that are coming due at the fastest rate of degradation for the pre-incorporation road. So 14%, it's going to grow a lot larger than that very quickly in the not too distant future. So your marginal and fair roads for pre-incorporation make up 51% of that pavement type. Whereas if you look at the asphalt roads, network average 75, backlog 1%, marginal and fair only represent 11%. That's a beautiful distribution of pavement conditions on post-incorporation roads there. So we worked with the town. So we met several times to develop the maintenance and rehab strategies that the town uses and that the town wants to use. And there was extensive conversation over what are those activities and what do they cost in the town. So there was a lot of thought and a lot of effort put into those costs such that we could model using those existing costs as defined. So we loaded all of that information into the pavement management system. I'm going to skip a couple of these slides for the sake of brevity, but just know the pavement management program prioritizes and it optimizes selections. And everybody always wants to know, well, why is that road picked and not mine? So the system uses sound logic. And one of the biggest constraints that we lean on is called financial optimization. We look at the cost of deferring every segment of road in the town. And if the cost is too large, then it behooves us to capture that roadway now before it costs more next year. So that's some of that financial logic that goes into that equation. Of course, we use other constraints too. So we don't only look at financial optimization, we look at traffic volume on roads. Arterial roads are going to have a higher priority over collectors, over locals, based on traffic volume. That's sound pavement management. Pavement type, asphalt's generally a higher priority than concrete because of rate of degradation and whatnot as well. So these are all the different priorities that we use to sequence selections that start answering the questions, well, why was that one picked and this one wasn't? So there's a detailed matrix that gets involved there. I'm going to skip over this slide just for the sake of brevity. Apparently I've been talking too slow, Mr. Weldy. Let's talk about today's needs of the pavement network. So right now today, if we calculate today's cost and if you were to write a blank check to fix all roads in like new condition, that magic number would be about $64 million based on the unit rates that we've programmed into the system. That means every road gets what it needs. Some only need lightweight preservation, a slurry seal, a microsurface, something of the sort. Others need a mill and overlay or a full depth reconstruction. Okay, so that's just based on that fix-all need as of today. A couple things that are interesting within those numbers. I mentioned it earlier, pre-incorporation roads are only 34% of the network by area. However, 77% of the fix-all costs that you see here are related to the pre-incorporation roads. And then also 75% of the fix-all costs is related to full reconstruction of those pre-incorporation roads. So we can see the pre-incorporation roads make up a large portion of the town's needs. Not so by area, but based on condition and cost of remediating those particular roads. So if we look at some of the budget analysis numbers, what you're seeing here, this is a zoom-in snapshot of the town's budget. First thing you're going to notice that the town's budget is listed at $2.125 million. You know that is not the town's budget. The town's budget is $2.5 million. However, we have removed 15% of that budget for miscellaneous costs. So things like engineering and inspection and striping, other costs that the town incurs that don't go to the pavement for pavement modeling purposes. So that's why you see 2.125 there. Another couple things that are interesting, if you look at that graphic on the right, that green line in the middle, second from the bottom, represents the town's existing budget. You notice the first 2 years, there's an increasing PCI. There's an upward slope, an upward momentum to it. That is a result of the CARES Act funding that has been programmed into these models. So this model already accounts for the $10 million expenditure that is being programmed for FY24 and FY25 for the CARES Act funding. So with the CARES Act funding and the town's $2.125 million budgeted, we could expect current conditions to drop from a network average of a 69 to a 67 over the 5-year analysis horizon. Another way to look at it too, this is a typical budget graph. Looks at things from a different perspective. On the x-axis there, you've got annual budget each year for 5 years. On the y-axis is the network average PCI score at the end of the 5-year analysis. The red line represents all the different models that we ran to establish the trend between funding and outcome of PCI. And we ran 12 different scenarios to establish that trend. The vertical lines are the ones that we wanted to display for you folks today, and I'll go through those fairly quickly. The green line is your current budget. We know network PCIs will drop to 67 in 5 years. The more alarming fact is that backlog increases to 15.3%. That's a big jump in a 5-year horizon to go from the 5% that it was at, or the 4% that it was at, to 15%. So we know there's a disparity if we're just looking at PCI alone. The gold line in the middle is to maintain existing network PCI. So the funding required to maintain a 69 is on the order of $3.2 million, plus 15% for miscellaneous expenses, because that is not included in these models. But here again, we're in a situation where backlog has still crept up largely to 12.5%. It's not controlling those fair and marginal roads that are at that steepest rate of degradation. So if we look at the purple line, this is what we'll call a target backlog. I mentioned earlier that anything less than 10% is considered financially ideal and healthy. So if we were to control it at, say, 8%, control the growth in backlog, that would require $5 million a year plus 15% to get that done. The net benefit is the network average PCI jumps to a 72. And the last one there on the right, someone always asks, well, what would it take to maintain our existing backlog? That number is $6.5 million per year is needed to maintain the existing backlog at roughly 5%. I think I already hit all these topics. We talked about 15% PCI and controlling for PCI. I get ahead of myself sometimes. I'm not going to go through this graph. This is a very similar graphic. We already touched on all those profiles. The difference here, though, is on the y-axis is the network backlog percentage. So you see the line inverse. So you can see as funding is decreased, backlog begins to increase in the network. So the scenarios that are highlighted here are the same scenarios that we just stepped through, but this graphic is available for anybody to review such that you can see what happens to backlog over time at different funding levels. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman.
Thank you, Mayor. Have we done any work at all, and maybe this is a Justin question, on pre-incorporation roads at all in the history of the town?
Madam Mayor, council member, all of the roads within the town's network that are not gated have received some type of treatment since incorporation. That includes in pre-incorporation roads. Quick back history. So the town for many, many years inherited a zone approach from the road district. That was a program that applied treatment every year over 7 zones. And so every single road in the town primarily received a little bit of asphalt repair and some slurry. So yes, maintenance was done on the pre-incorporation roads, and some of it was extensive where they cut and removed the intersection pavement to repair it.
I have another question then, too. Do we have any concrete roads in this town?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay. I know it's always cheaper, generally speaking, to go with asphalt over concrete. Is there ever a time where that might change, do you see, or?
The initial cost for concrete is extremely high, but in the long term, it's probably the best bet because it has a lifespan of 75 years or more, depending on the climate conditions, temperature fluctuations, freeze thaw.
Thank you.
Justin, he just mentioned that $5 million is the minimum to keep up the backlog, whatever. Even if you had that money or more, would you be able to contract out for that? And if so, what year would that be able to start?
Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, we would certainly need to do some planning using the roadway asset services modeling. And put together a multi-year, most likely a 3 to 5 year horizon. Planning beyond that is very, very difficult because of price fluctuations, inflation. It would probably take all of 18 to 24 months to put together a comprehensive plan and put together modeling that would show an estimated number of lane miles that could be completed in that time frame. The challenge that we face primarily, and we're about to face that, the new year's coming up, is $5 million is a lot of money. And because we have several very narrow local roads, it requires the removal completely of those roads and digging down about a foot or so, replacing the base and putting new asphalt. That is very disruptive to the neighbors, the homeowners, trash, mail, you name it. So all of those activities have an impact, and all of those impacts take time. Prior to, we reach out to every utility that may or may not have an interest or a utility in that location. The ideal situation, while we're in there, allow them to replace their facilities with updated facilities, increased time. So there are challenges, and we're about to face one of the biggest ones next year. So while we're certainly going to accomplish the goal that the Mayor and Council has set forward, it's going to be a challenge.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Thomason, you mentioned the cost of deferral, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. Thank you, Justin, because again, and I love that graphic that you had, because people often see the roads that are kind of in bad shape and they're like, well, why did we spend, $1 million on Saguaro last year when it's like the best one? But this cost of deferral comes into play, and preserving roads that we had really just completed. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it helps give a little rationalization for why you do those things. So the $64 million, is that how you look at the $5 million a year, or do you see a scenario where we would be to a point of maintenance in 5 or 6 years, given maybe some of the challenges of spending that much money? per year?
Sure. So it all comes down to funding. So that fix-all scenario, just to be very clear about what it is, it's a snapshot in time as of now, using today's base rates as we know them to be. So that's a $64 million fix everything, give something what it needs. To get to a maintenance state, meaning maybe even elevating PCI and controlling backlog, it's probably going to take a large influx of capital. Whether that's a bond initiative or sales tax or something, there's going to have to be, or if it comes from the general fund, those are all things that I don't have purview to, but funding is going to have to be acquired in some manner to get to that maintenance point where we have a higher PCI and a lower backlog. Now, as you mentioned, and as Justin just mentioned too, the challenge is getting that work done, having the contractors on staff and available to do that, and also not disrupting the entire town all year long. So those are challenges that go with it. Is it possible? Sure, anything's possible. But the critical thing is that funding source. Without the funding source, nothing happens.
Thank you. We started with pavement management, 2008 or maybe, and but like you said, when we had the road districts, we had the zones. So now I think we've come to the conclusion through experts like you and a couple others that we've had in the past that got us to the point of at least where we need to go. The getting there has been a challenge for us. We've had probably 5 elections to try to get there. Right off the bat, 1989 was when the road districts went away. They had 2 attempts at property taxes that did not pass. Then we had some bonds. We tried a larger bond package several years ago. Then we did Saguaro, which was a wonderful thing that did pass. So the problem isn't new to us, and we still will have to figure out how to get to that maintenance point, because again, it is something that we've known about and have struggled with for many years. Again, though, I appreciate so much your input. One other question about percentages, and this is a discussion that we've had pretty much every year also. When you have like Shea Boulevard involved or Saguaro now, and they're in good condition, that can make the percentage look better than what most people would think when they look through our town. So just so that they know that, they're like, well, this road I don't like, this road I don't like. But those are large roads in good condition, so that our PCI would say, hey, it's 69, it's going to be 67, but you know, you look at it as a comparison, you're like, well, that's not that bad. But we're living with the reality of what we're living with every day, which are these mostly neighborhood roads, I would say, that people notice and that concern them. So really appreciate that you were able to point all that out. And and all the pre-incorporation roads, they don't all need total reconstruction. I think you had like a 70%.
Correct. Yeah, they do not all need total reconstruction. The vast majority of them do, though.
Yes, okay.
So as you saw by that distribution that's in there specifically for the pre-incorporation asphalt roads, there's a large majority of them that fall below a PCI of 60.
Okay.
And as soon as it falls below a PCI of 60, there's just not a whole lot you can do to
The
that
numbers
road at that time.
don't work out as far as
Right. It gets
what the
more
treatment is. But there are times that it does, and we recently had someone that was talking about how we had repaired a road in a way that they felt was inadequate, but there are times that you do that because you're not ready to do the reconstruction, but it does help. It helps to fill the cracks. It helps to do that, you know, the sealing and such. So we've been doing that a lot and trying to prolong it. I think some people my age can relate to getting the shot in the hip instead of the hip replacement right away, and that's what we're trying to do here, and we've been trying to do it for a couple decades, so really appreciate it.
Yeah, and that's very common. So in the industry, we call that a stopgap. You can't always do what you need to do. You know that the sound engineering decision is to do X rehab on a particular road, but sometimes a stopgap does need to be employed as a result of that. So those are decisions that have to be made, for sure.
Thank you so much. Alan, did you have any questions on the phone there? Maybe not.
Mayor, he's having difficulty, so we're trying to work out something we can do for him so he can hear.
Oh, thank you, Linda. So before we go to the next, I want to thank you, Zach Thomason and the Bart Williamson, Scott Gordon, Rafael Rivera, and Mark Kramer, who are all on the team, and we appreciate all of your input and help with this.
Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
much for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Madam Mayor, the next presentation is going to be from Mark Graham. He's part of what I would describe as an incredible volunteer group of 12 men that have spent the last 20 months working with town staff, roadway asset services. Let me make sure I get the correct one here. That's it. And poring over an incredible amount of data to bring to you their recommendations and their findings tonight. It would be difficult for me to explain how grateful I am as a Public Works Director and the town manager for the amount of time these individuals have contributed to their community, and that's what it's about. These gentlemen are all volunteers that answered an ad from the town manager to help town staff and the mayor and council with this challenge that we've been wrestling with for many, many years. I couldn't name all of them, and we have done that in the past. Several of them have asked that we not do that because they're not looking for the recognition. For anybody that is interested, just need to go back a few council packets. Each one of them are listed individually. With that, I would like to introduce Mark Graham. He'll do the next presentation.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing us to be here, Mayor and Council, interim town manager. Thank you very much. Zach has gone over some of the things that I want to touch on. Justin has touched on some things. You have asked intelligent questions that will surely come up. And so what I want to do, what I'd like to do is to just sort of run through the presentation. I know that, is this being recorded? I don't think residents probably will watch this. And so some of this information I may say is more for the benefit of the residents to understand how they fit into this equation as well, because it's their streets, right? And so we need to make sure that we take care of everybody. So just a real quick introduction about us. And this is the agenda. I'm just going to blow by this. So the citizens are who make up this committee. And I don't think I can stress that enough. We're not politically motivated. We're not agenda motivated. We're people that drive on the streets that everybody else drives on. And so if you wanted an impartial group of people to take a hard look at it, these are the folks that live here. They pay the taxes. They expect the best out of everything that the town has to offer, and the town does offer quite a bit. And what's really unique, and when I joined this committee, I thought, boy, I came to the wrong committee, because we have some very talented, educated people here. You can see civil engineers, municipal engineers, transportation people, road construction. They were talking about stuff. I had no clue what they were talking about. However, I figured I could hang in with these guys for a while and maybe give it 2 cents worth. And so we met regularly, as Justin had mentioned, for over a year and a half. And we did it also in person. We did it through subgroups that we had, because there's a lot of information to dive into, a lot of information. And some of us had expertise in some areas and others in others. So again, I just really want to emphasize that we work for the community, and our interests are for the community. And the assignment that was really given to us was, as Justin mentioned, to report back to the council with recommendations and funding options. And there were times when we wondered how we were ever going to get there, because it's so complicated, it's so complex, it's so frustrating to try to get through all of this, but yet it was very rewarding, and most of us enjoyed every minute of it. But we think it's really good work that we've done. And so we looked at I wanted you guys to understand the process. So we studied and learned the history of our streets, how we got here. We analyzed previous studies, one being the one that Zach just talked about. We physically inspected streets. We analyzed standards that we had. And the mayor had mentioned some funding options that were before the citizens in town passed. So we've looked at all of these things, and it was really a challenge to try to figure out where we go. But what we learned and what the streets are telling everyone that lives here is that they're full of cracks and bumps and potholes, and we know that they need attention, and they need the attention not only in the work, but in the attention of money to get us there. And so that was a simple thing to understand. But yet we fell back onto those reports that were previously done, going back to 2008, Stantec, IMS, and now RAS. And they, in a nutshell, have told us one thing, and that is we need more money. We don't have the luxury of a lot of money, so we have to think creatively. We had to think outside of the box. And the challenge for all of us on the committee was to say, okay, what can we do that we haven't done before? And we think that it's really important that we take a creative look at this. How do we get here with our streets? Well, it's been partly underfunding for years. It's no fault of any council member or mayor or anything like that. It's just money only goes so far, and you have to allocate it. And you can't take so much away from one bucket to put it in another. And sometimes those buckets don't intermix, and that's important to understand. Certain monies are allocated for certain things. It can only be spent for that. So why waste money on this when we could use it for our streets? Well, we have to use it for that. And so that's part of the learning process that we went through as a committee to understand those things. The early streets, as was mentioned, were not built great. They were built to the standards at that time. Those standards have since changed, and they've been upgraded. And then, as just Zach mentioned, the streets deteriorate. As soon as they're completed, they start to create degrading, and they need attention on a regular basis. The citizens have not approved several past proposals that have been before us. That's delayed the process. And how the funds have been prioritized, I think, is really interesting, because Justin and his team have really done a great job. And I've got a map that I want to show you here in a little bit, and I think it'll strike home just how good of a job that they've done in managing it. Are some of our streets bad? Yeah, absolutely. But they've done a really good job in minimizing and working with what they had. Unfortunately, the bad news is that a lot of the money has been allocated to some of our major streets, which raises their PCI, as was pointed out. But we realize that it's time for some action. It's time for a different plan. And so part of and this is where I want to refer to a map here. I'm going to take you on sort of an aerial view of the town. Zach had brought up, you saw this map, but I'm going to, whoops. Let me go here. All right. I'm going to take you on a sort of a flyover. So we talked about, and Zach had mentioned, all the various levels of PCI ratings. And again, PCI is the quality of the streets, right? But we found that once you start digging in too deep, it gets really complicated, and then it's just mind-numbing. Because we're simple people, at least I am on the committee, we said, okay, let's simplify this. Let's look at the town. I'm going to scroll out here and move this way. So we said, instead of looking at all these different PCIs, let's look at, let's see if I can raise this up so you can see it, really 3 levels. The PCI of 70 and above, which happened to be about the grade I would strive for in school, was okay. They were good. They didn't need a lot of work. We can manage those. What we really need to pay attention to are those fair to poor, and that's the fair is kind of in a category of 40 to 70 to keep it simple, and I'm going to make it even simpler. We said everybody understands street lights. Green is great. We all love green. Yellow is, I can beat that, maybe. And then there's the red, which we know are problematic. So let's just kind of zoom over here to where we kind of all started building roads here in Fountain Hills. And just for a reference point, we're at the corner here of Saguaro and Shea. And you can see Shea is great. It's beautiful. Over in this part of Fountain Hills, there's some really questionable streets that really need attention. And the purpose of me going through this is for you to try to get a sense on a little more local level, a little more area level, what streets we need to be concerned about. So down around Desert Canyon Golf Course, you can see a lot of old roads that are starting to really come into question as their viability, and what can we do to save them. You see quite a few numbers of red roads in here, all the way up to around the town lake. And this is something that was pointed out that I think is really interesting, and it goes to Councilman Spadell's point about saving streets. This is kind of the northeast segment of Fountain Hills, and you can see a lot of green up in this area. And many of those were pre-incorporated streets. And Justin, if I'm wrong on any of this, throw something at me. But a lot of these early streets were saved. And so the interesting thing about throwing money into a sort of a borderline street, these yellow streets, is once you've done that, a funny thing happens. The PCI rating goes up. So these would probably be yellow at some point, or maybe even reds. With a little attention, a little work, they've come up to a level that we don't really need to worry about these streets too much. Does that make sense? Okay. And so you can kind of see as we fly over more towards the school area, we still see quite a bit of yellow. And so what I'm leading towards here, this is kind of the northwest area, which is a fairly new area, but you can see areas like Golden Eagle. This is Golden Eagle going up here. Golden Eagle's getting in trouble, and we need to pay some attention to it. It's a big street, needs a lot of attention. But you can see some of the newer areas down through Sunridge. You know, those streets are okay. So again, if you look at a big map and you look at it all, it can be a little confusing. And so what we tried to do is to break it down. And so our plan, excuse me, our plan was to say, what can we do? I don't know if I want this, Justin. Do I want this? No. I said, okay, I didn't do it anyway. I think I want up here. Little help here, Justin. I'm a Mac guy, so I hate PCs. There we go. Okay. So again, we tried to look at it and say, okay, what if we take a different approach here? What if we look at not paying attention that much? We still need to service and maintain the 70-plus roads. But let's really kind of look at these 40s or everything below 70. And that's really kind of the strategy that we started looking at. Excuse me. In 2020, the town had incorporated had undergone some changes to how they looked at roads and analyzed it, and they basically put them into the buckets of arterials, collectors, and locals. And these are the acceptable PCI ratings that we'll have for these. And while this was pretty good, it helped, and as you saw from the map, there's a lot of green on that map. And this strategy really helped bring some of those questionable streets up to a PCI level that was helpful. But we're treading water, and we're not treading water very well because we're going under and we're taking big gulps of water in here. So what we really had to do was to say, okay, let's go back, let's look at what the PCIs really mean, A, B, C, D, and F, and we'll kind of go from there to come up with a plan of action. And again, I think that one of the things that helped drive our PCI up on the total networks is the attention that we gave to some of these long arterials and collector streets. That overall helped our PCI rating quite a bit. So we said to ourselves, as Henry Ford said, if we always do what we've always done, we're always going to get what we always got. We can't keep avoiding the fact that our streets need work, and we need the money to do that. And it's just going to get worse. We can't keep doing that same plan. And so what we did then was to recognize that money is only part of the stories. We needed to have that plan. We can't continue to do the status quo. We have to come up with something that's unique. Understand that the money for our streets come from sales tax, general funds, et cetera, right? We've had an influx, fortunately, this past year or year and a half of federal funds. Sometimes we get some state funds and grants, and county can throw some monies, but these are not sustainable. We don't know how long they're going to last. We don't know if we're ever going to get one again. We can look to cut town services. That's always an option. It costs us in other ways by cutting those. And it's a slower process. We just don't feel like, and we'll talk about it in a minute, we just don't really feel like we can catch up by cutting, $1 million or $1.5 million or $2. We're talking big major bucks, as Zach had referred to here. It's like we're out of time in talking about what we may be able to do on our budget. We need to think outside the box. We need to get some more money. And incidentally, as the importance of this backlog, I want to emphasize. And again, a backlog is one of those streets with a 40 or below. Well, that's great if you don't live on that street. But if you live on that street, if you use those streets, backlog streets are not acceptable, right? So why should we tolerate really any kind of a backlog? It's probably going to happen because streets are always declining. But our goal shouldn't be to have an acceptable backlog level. Our goal should be to have great streets at best that we can provide to our citizens whenever we can in an affordable way. And so that's the other area that we looked at and said, okay, we've got to do more than what we've just been doing. So our committee's report, and it's in a packet of information that you've gotten or you will receive. There's my high school education coming up. The committee's recommendation is to fix all now. So what does that mean? And Zach sort of referred to it. But what it really means is that we're taking this a little different approach. We're thinking differently. And we said, okay, we're not going to repair anything above 70, as I talked about, and let's throw our money at getting everything up to a 70. So everything from 0 to 69, let's throw money at that. And it's a much more realistic proposition than fixing everything up, rebuilding every street that needs to be rebuilt. And so how are we going to do that? And we can do this in over a 5-year period starting in 2015 or 2025. So I throw this up to you for your consideration. What we're looking at on this chart are a couple things. The C, D, and F streets, which are the 70 and below. This is what, based on the RAS information, let me rephrase something. This is really important. We think that not only do the pre-incorporated streets, not all of them need to be completely rebuilt. We think that we can save those. That quadrant up in the northeast area of Fountain Hills, a lot of the C, D, and F type of work was done on those, and suddenly they're now much better streets. And the citizens will be a lot happier for sure. But this is a breakdown of what we estimate the cost would be to repair the C, D, and F streets with the service that we would put on them, or the repair that we would put on them. Still a big price tag, and they factored in the $8 million of the federal funds as well. So we're looking at a price tag of $36 million. If we go in and we fix our streets, I would say for understanding it would be kind of the El Lago type treatment. It was really bad, and now it's really good. And the PCI rating on that is probably much, much higher. And we think it's going to last. So the idea is get them up to 70, and then with the $2.125 million maintenance budget that we have, we believe that on an annual basis, that would not need to change. We think that we can maintain the streets once they're up to a good level. We think that we've got the data to prove it. And Mr. Butler, a member of our committee, has tons of data if anybody wants to see, and some of the data is included in your packet here as well. So the other thing I want to point out on this particular slide, in one of the conversations that we started having towards the end of the committee's work, was what about our intersections? And this isn't just paving the intersections. This is fixing those intersections that ultimately probably need to be addressed with street lights, four-way stops, roundabouts, twirly cues, whatever they might need. Let's try to figure out how we can address some of these major intersections and stop using the money on capital expenditures out of the town budget. Maybe these are possibilities for funding sources and take care of that. We estimate that there's $9 million worth of intersection work, redesigning, and all of that. We add in inflation, we're looking at a $50 million package. Now you can keep all of these, we could take some out. The other thing I want to point out is the graph or the chart below that. breaks it all down by the types of streets. And one of the conversations that, and the reason for that is some of these, depending on the funding source of how we come about getting money, it might be more palatable for people to vote on smaller packages than a big $50 million package. The downside to that is if you don't get the whole enchilada, you know, you're going to be a taco short of a full meal, right? And so, you know, you almost have to spend this kind of money. So the important thing here, or the really variable in this particular slide is the $9 million for intersections. And we feel strongly that that's something that council ought to consider. And none of these things, obviously, we're not going to be making decisions on tonight, but we want you to have all the information that you need. I want to make sure I don't run over too far on time here. So what are the options for funding this sort of things? And these are really only the 3 or 4 things that we can come up with. We can cut to the town budget. As Zach showed you on that one chart, you can throw $7 million a year for the next 5 years, and you're still going to end up with a 12 or 15% backlog. You know, I don't think that we can find $7 million in our annual budget for the next 5 or 6 years. We can look at sales tax increases. Well, nobody likes to have a sales tax increase. We already have kind of a high rate. We estimate, as the committee, we estimated that it would have to go up to over 4% starting now in order to allocate enough funds on an annual basis to pay for like $9 million worth of repairs that we would need for the next 5 or 6 years to get to that $45 million. Property tax is always something that the town has the town residents are not fond of, and nobody likes to pay any kind of taxing. You know, the upside to property tax is that there's no interest involved for the residents. It's a little cheaper on an annual basis for them. And the third funding, and the funding that we're recommending, is that we look at some bond funding, and we put it up. You know, we could go back and look at, you know, 36 million is 50 million, 45 million. There's a couple different options here, but, you know, the advantage for bond funding is that it goes away after a certain period of time. And RAS, I know, can work with us and work with the town on telling us what some options are for an annual cost, both for residential and commercial properties. Let's see. And I think that's, you know, that's pretty much it that I wanted to say. I know I'm running short on time, and I know you've got your regular meeting to attend. Let me go back. And then I just want to retouch. Zach touched on it. You've seen this slide before. The pavement life cycle. The important thing to keep in mind here is that every 6 to 7 years, you need maintenance on a street. And what this particular slide sort of emphasizes is you start with a PCI here. It goes down over a 6 or 7 year period of time. You do the maintenance, and then boom, it bounces back up again. So this is what reinforces our plan to get our streets up to a certain level with this bond issue, get the streets done, then maintain them at the level that we can afford. Hopefully, as we go forward, the town will grow and even more funds will come in. But I think it's a very good strategy, something that we haven't done before or haven't considered. And that's pretty much it. We feel strongly it's really the only realistic way that we're ever going to catch up on our streets. We can't keep doing what we're doing because we know it's not working. And ultimately, we'll end up with a town with excellent streets. And I mentioned in previous presentations to council that I came from a town that will remain nameless, in large town in southern Arizona, that has really crappy streets. I mean, it's just awful. But they've done what most cities and most towns do, and that's afraid to take action. And I didn't move to Fountain Hills to sit here and watch it decline. So I think the time is now. I think the appetite for our citizens who now recognize that our streets are decaying. I don't think a council meeting has erupted without somebody talking about our streets and when are we going to fix our streets. And again, the only streets that people care about are the streets that they live on and use. However, we've got to sort of change that because the streets are a vital part of the community. And whether you use a particular street or not, That's the price you pay for living in a town like Fountain Hills. We've got to have good streets. You've got to get your mail delivered. You've got to get your Amazon deliveries made. Those all require good streets that you all have to use. And so with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions or defer them to somebody a lot smarter than me.
Thank you so much. Questions or comments from council? Any questions?
No?
Is Alan there? Alan, do you have any questions?
I'm going to hold back since I missed a few minutes of that. I don't want to go over something that has already been over. But I have a couple of questions, but I can just run them by Justin when, offline.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Well, I know you don't want names mentioned, but how about 45 years of business management, 40 years of transportation planning, 36 years of design construction industry, 33 years of civil engineering, 28 in road construction, 25 in project consulting, 20 years of home building industry, 15 in project management, and 8 in design and roadway management. Those are our citizens, and I don't know how to thank you for all of this work. I'm sure we'll be contacting you more. I mean, you're probably
If you were in the audience, I could ask
free
them
for
to
the
stand
summer.
up.
I see you all out there, and these are anonymous heroes. And but I think all of us would agree, and we're probably trying to absorb a lot of this information right now, that we are so grateful, and to RAS for getting all the information and in a way that they could use and that they can communicate to us. This is the first crack, the first bit of communication out to our folks, and this is, I mean, time-wise, we've got some time. You know, the $5 million and the $5 million really did us a huge favor this time, and I'm grateful to the previous council that decided that we would put the huge bulk of that into streets, and grateful so much to Justin for doing what he has been able to do up until this point, and also Grady Miller, Rachel Goodwin, Justin, of course, David Janover, Andy, Jeff Pierce, and Angela, and all who have helped so much over 20 months or whatever it's been, because it's been a wonderful piece of work that you put in front of us, and more to come. Any other comments or questions from anyone? No?
And I think the
Yeah, oh, I'm
committee,
sorry.
a number of the committee members have said, hey, if you guys need more help, if we can do some other activities, you know, related to around the streets, you know, we can try to step forward and do some of those things. So it's a good group of
Oh,
folks.
we will.
Yeah.
Yes, Councilman.
Thank you again for all your effort and your work and your experience. Mayor, I have a question for us. What's the next step here for us now?
I'll defer to Rachel if you like, but in my opinion, we are, we've got months, we've got time. Rachel, do you want to kind of wrap it up?
Sure. It's a good question. I think the ball is in the court of counsel to decide if there are questions that need, is there further research? Is there further need from the committee? If so, what does that look like? And then it's a matter of, if we want to move forward with a plan, which plan is it, and which funding mechanism do you want to use? So there probably needs to be further discussion. If we go with the recommendation of the committee, which is to bond, there is a timeline associated with that. We have already missed that timeline for this fall's election. So the soonest that could happen is next fall. And that's, again, a big assumption at this point, if we even wanted to do that. So there would need to be a timeline put together. We would need to work with Linda Mendenhall on some, again, those different benchmarks, how we would need to hit those. And then if that's not our funding mechanism, if we're going to explore other options, we'll need to look at what that is. Is that deferring more from the general fund? Is it looking at a combination of things? How do we want to do that? But I imagine this item will probably need to come back in the fall when the council resumes session for discussion and further direction at that point.
And I should mention, too, that RAS has mentioned that they can run a bunch of different business models as well, or financing models as well. So do this, don't do that, what happens here? And so you've got that. I don't know if that's part of their contract or an additional fund, but that's a resource that you may want to use. And there's committee members who will be interested in helping promote whatever it is that we want to the community. in a non-partial way. So that's available as well. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. To me, wouldn't we want to take a look at real property tax? Because would be constant influx of income and allocate it to the streets, even though it would take a while to do that. At least that would be continually funding our streets at the long term. But I guess before that, we may have to look at doing a small bond or something, to start off having more than, another $10 million or so to start out while real property tax monies build up. But as we know from past experience, our town complains about the towns incessantly. However, they're not willing to pass what I think is a reasonable property tax in order to fund that. So it's like a catch-22. So the income that we get from in the budget, et cetera, we're never going to have enough money. So I think it's something that, yes, we have to start a real hard discussion right now and really look at the hard facts and then look at how we're going to approach our community and how to realistically resolve it before it gets worse and not better. That's my input.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and yeah, those will be the topics of discussion that will come up for sure. Anything else for this part of our evening?
Also, thank you to the committee. I really appreciate it. I know it's a lot of hard work and a lot of time went into it, so thank you.
And their spouses, huh? All right, then I think we can adjourn. We'll adjourn, and we'll be back at 5:30. Thank you, 5:25.